Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast with Adam, Cameron, and Emily.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name's Adam Jones.
And I'm Cameron Horine.
And I'm Emily Beck.
Excellent. We've got all three hosts in the room, so we've got an all-star cast today, right? Just because Emily's here. So.
Yeah, right. Of course.
So today we thought it was a good idea, just kind of before the 2024 crop, to sit down and kind of discuss some of the things that have been going on crop protection-wise. Essentially, the dicamba ruling, from the U.S. District Court and its effects to crop protection in 2024, and also kind of dive in a little bit to how it affects, chemical registrations, EPA registrations moving forward, and really the way that we kind of look as standard operating procedure in putting crop protection products on the ground. So those are kind of some of the things that we want to discuss today. I feel like we've got the right guests in the room. So you guys have both been on the podcast before, but we got Scott Wilburn and Jordan Tomlinson. You guys want to just give another quick introduction to yourselves?
Sure. I'm Scott Wilburn. I'm staff agronomist. I cover the central region. On a map, essentially, that's between the area between St. Louis and Kansas City. So.
Yep.
Jordan Tomlinson. I'm the Director of Crop Protection and Seed. Just oversee the seed and crop protection divisions here in the home office, mostly from a procurement standpoint and making sure that we get the right products to our retail locations and our wholesale locations.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Jordan and Scott, I appreciate both of you taking time to join us today and provide your insights. So first off, we probably ought to discuss kind of what the recent label, vacation was from EPA. Scott, you want to go into that, or Jordan? Either one of you guys
want
want
to take it? Yeah. So I may get parts of this wrong, but I think we know the overall gist of what happened on February 6th. So there was a federal court in Arizona that basically had challenged the dicamba registration. I think they were citing that it was violating FIFRA. Federal Insecticide, I had to write this down, Fungicide and Rodenticide Act. I think we had done a little bit of research before the podcast and looked back at, this has happened in 2020, a little bit different situation then, but that's what started all this. So that was February 6th. There's been some changes since then, so when that was announced in February, it kind of put a stop to over-the-top dicamba usage of Ingenia, Tavium, and Extendamax. So those products come from Syngenta, BSF, and Bayer. So that really put the market in an uproar, uncertain what was going to happen. I think there's somewhere between, I saw a couple different sites sorted, or a couple different sources cite between 40 and 50 million acres worth of cotton and soybeans in the U.S. So it's not a small problem. February 14th, the EPA challenged that and issued an existing stock order for those three products, over the top and dicamba. So kind of what that means for us today is we can use what we have of those products. The problem is we don't have everything that we need. So BSF, Bayer, and Syngenta are not going to send more product out. So if they had product that was sitting at their manufacturing plants, it cannot be moved, but existing stocks and what we call the channel inventory or at the grower level can be applied. There's some dates involved in that as to when product needs to be sold, when product needs to be applied, but we can use those existing stocks today.
Right. Still following the previous label, of course.
Yeah, that's correct.
All the, all the facets of that. So, Scott, I guess, tell me, looking back, I guess, when the label was vacated, it was just gone, right? I don't care if it was sitting in the spray tank, it was illegal to apply that pesticide. With the way they have it now, as long as we are in possession or grower is in possession, we can still move that to the field. So that's I guess, kind of lax the rules for this year just a little bit. There's still
as of now,
right? There's still some dicamba in the channel, right? We have some at retail. Growers, it's March 6th. There's probably a lot on farm already, which is good. So for this year, and I'd say most of our production for our trade territory that we're going to be discussing would be use on XtendFlex soybeans, use on Extend cotton. When I start talking cotton and Delta stuff, I'm way outside of my zone. But so I guess most of my reference points going to come from XtendFlex soybeans. So as long as a grower can get the product for 2024, probably not a major shift in what their weed control plan was for that soybean crop. Maybe, as long, again, like you said, Jordan, I don't know that there's enough in the channel to supply really as many planned applications as probably there were for that, 60% or whatever you said that, of acres.
Yeah, when we look at our history with those over-the-top products, those 3 over-the-top products, we probably have about 60% of what we had before. And some of that isn't because we didn't try to get it. When we, probably a month before this, I think BSF and maybe some of these other suppliers knew that maybe there was an issue coming because this was up for some re-registration.
Right.
And so they hadn't shipped product because there was some uncertainty around there. So we would historically have more in our warehouses at our retail locations today than we do, and it's because of that. So 60% is kind of the number that we have.
Gotcha. Okay. So, Scott, I guess how does this affect our 2024 crop? And then we probably need to start looking beyond that at some point here for because essentially this is an existing stocks order, which means the last of those dates that Jordan mentioned, once that date is up, it's gone.
Correct.
Right. I mean that again. We're back to the label being vacated.
Yeah, we at least know, the maximum of how much we have, in the pipeline and what's available.
Right.
I guess first and foremost, if I'm a grower and particularly if I spray my own, I want to take possession of this pretty quick.
Sure.
This is in the courts now, so a lot of things could happen between now and May and June. But at least that if Plan A involves dicamba, I would, I'd be talking with your local store, have a plan for what you have, and just really be able to, if possible, again, if you're doing your own spraying, go ahead and get that on your place. I alluded to that being Plan A. I would also have a Plan B and a Plan C, and some of that is for this year. I think it needs to be part of really any plan, but going forward, it could become even more important. And that's the same old story. I mean, residuals, overlapping residuals, timing everything correctly, but really keeping in mind that if things would occur where all of a sudden your XtendFlex beans essentially become Liberty beans, that you've set everything up to succeed with that platform. Doing everything right to give us the best chance possible with Liberty, which is, as we all know that have sprayed it, it can be fickle, and there's times you love it and times you hate it. So.
Yeah, I mean that's my thoughts. Is I feel like we almost have to strategize a little bit more of how we're going to go about utilizing our dicamba, knowing we only have 60% this year. Especially those guys. I feel like at least some of the producers I've talked to, some of the locations I've talked to, at least when we're thinking outside of the Boothill, of the XtendFlex acres we have outside of the Boothill, a lot of those guys. The dicamba, over-the-top dicamba in season is, hey, we don't necessarily want to have to do that unless we have to rescue, right? A lot of times it's using for the it's using in the burn down. They feel a little bit more safer and confident of not necessarily dinging neighbors enlist from that. But in the boot, it's completely different, right? They're using it as a but also Palmer is a much bigger issue from weeds perspective there. And so the boot is basically 100% extend anyways. Cotton country, it's a lot more likely from there. And I almost feel that we have to strategize and be a little bit more thoughtful, especially in that area is, if you're used to that area doing extend then also over the top, but if you may not have stock knowing that Palmer is such a big deal and Liberty may not be the best over the top, maybe we need to find a different option on the pre side and save some of your stocks of dicamba on the pre, so you have the dicamba for the over the top to help you from that Palmer. So I think to a certain degree we have to strategize and think about that, but then also knowing that, again, you are taking a little bit of gamble because it is a little bit fluid situation of, since stuff's in the courts, it could change, and you think, hey, I'm going to save it for over the top because I need it for control on Palmer. Well, then the courts may make a completely different decision before we get there, right? So this is a chess match that I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to win to a certain degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, we had a conversation on the phone the other day where we mentioned, I think, the brevity of the situation here, and the reason that this is such a big deal is the fact that we're all trying to control Palmer, or in the north, Waterhemp, right? And I made a comment about Waterhemp is our driver weed, and you kind of clapped back at me, right? So give me that same statement because it was really good.
Well, driver weed, I mean, I know that's what we call it, but it just seems just not, I don't know, not a bold enough statement. You know, I said maybe driver with a, you know, in all caps or whatever the heck. It's just everything. I mean, I've been with MFA for 27 years. I turned 50 this year. My whole career, I mean, I've done a lot of other things, but so much of it is centered around water hemp. You know, I think of Dr. Bradley and the other weed scientists. I mean, I just wonder when they were signing up for this, and did they realize that so much of their life was going to center around one species?
Yep.
When I was working I started working for MFA when I was in college, over in Ladonia, and you know did some spraying and some stuff over there, and you know I recall at that time farmers bringing in these plants, which none of it meant anything to me at the time. But the big thing was, this is early 90s, 93 or 94. The big thing was looking at some different characteristics on the plant, trying to determine, okay, is this plain old red root pigweed or is it water hemp? Now I think looking back, a lot of it was probably already water hemp at that time. But it has been just front and center of so many things that we've done, so many cultural practices. We did a lot of liquid fertilizer, back in the day. A lot of guys applied product off of did a lot of herbicides off of a field cultivator. As soon as we started wanting extremely shallow incorporation simply because of water hemp, and then we wanted no incorporation simply because of water hemp. I mean, it changed not only the chemicals we used, it changed the practices we did. So it is how, I know there's a lot of other things we control with the same chemistry. I know we have a lot of other problems out there. I mean, when you start talking about Johnson grass that's resistant to glyphosate, or some of these other issues that we have, but this is the one that seems to have defined it all. And then when you thought it couldn't get any worse, here comes Palmer, which actually makes water hemp look kind of manageable when you have them in the same field.
No, absolutely. I think that kind of brings a perspective to the situation, because dicamba is it's an effective mode of, effective in air quotes, right? We have to use that with every mode of action that we use now, but it is still an effective mode of action on killing water hemp. And that's a tool that we really can't afford to, even if you do not use it in your system currently, it's still a tool that we really can't afford to give up, because there just are not very many of them that still work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
Well, and I think that's a good point, and I don't know how far down the path you want to get on some of this stuff, but, I understand out in the country, both with growers and even with, folks that work in the industry, and including MFA folks, there's a lot of people that kind of, have a foot in both camps, but most folks have kind of divided up. You're either team enlist or team extend. And, if you're on team enlist right now watching this, you may not even be paying attention to it because it doesn't really affect you. Or you may even, be watching it thinking, well, maybe it's a good thing. And, I get that. When we have these issues, when we have off-target movement, I get those phone calls, in my current position, and when I was, back working at the stores around home, I also got those phone calls and looked at those. And I've looked at those situations on friends and family and people I go to church with. It's not always fun and often uncomfortable. So I totally get that. At the same time, I'm looking at a list right now of all of our modes of action and looking at what we have already lost, looking at what we still have available, and every one of those that is still available either has some downsides associated with that or some very serious resistance concerns already, including dicamba, including 2,4-D, including, you're going to hear more about the group 15. So far that has been, at least the confirmed resistance has been over in Illinois, but it's a couple sites. It's not just the initial news was esmetolochlor, but they've since worked with acetochlor, Outlook, Zidua. That's scary. Now you're talking about the products that we use in front of corn and beans and other crops. We use them pre, we use them post. We've really depended on that. We've still got group 14s, the PPOs. Obviously, we lost those a long time ago over the top. But as a pre, they still have a lot of effectiveness. But in some areas, depending on, how the ground lays and that kind of thing, folks have shied away from them because of some early season crop injury, stand reduction. I get that. But, we're going to have to look at ways to make these things work again. Every single, glufosinate, we are putting a lot of pressure on Liberty. There are reports of resistance with it. I haven't been able to dive in really deep on those to know exactly all the parameters. I don't doubt the research, but number one, we're talking with something that, on Monday works great and on Wednesday it doesn't. So, I'd want to know exactly how the research was done. I'd also, want to know how it was done in relation to how we actually use it out in the field. Mm-hmm. That's been a situation in the past. So, having said all that and kind of chasing along, rabbit, even if you are not using dicamba, you need to be concerned about this because, HPPDs, I didn't even touch on this. We've got confirmed Waterhemp resistance to HPPDs. In those areas, we used, just going back 20 some odd years, we used a lot of dicamba in our post applications and our 2-pass programs on corn. As soon as Callisto came out, we shelved the dicamba and we went to Callisto. Well, we're back to using dicamba in those areas. So, if you're not using dicamba on your beans, you may be using it on your corn before too long. Mm-hmm. And then I'm concerned because in some areas we're using it again now on both crops. Yep. And then I'm seeing silly stuff out there. I've seen some recommendations, not from MFA. I hope we're not doing this with some low rate recommendations of the extent of the Enlist products even. 2,4-D was confirmed, we had resistance confirmed years ago. There's been a couple other sites show up. If it can show up one place, it can show up anywhere else. And, if we're starting to go out there with some low rates, we're just encouraging that. So the second point on all this, even if you're not in the dicamba world, is just understand that dicamba is the low-hanging fruit for anybody coming after herbicides, insecticides in general. They've got their target on plenty of other products, including insecticides. And I think we all just need to be aware and as united as we can be in trying to keep these AIs that have been very important to us.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you touched on it. Obviously, we have so many premixes now that have multiple modes of actions, right? We've got, you've got a group 15 with a group, whatever else in there to help solve these, say Acuron has multiple modes of action, right? So we can try to resist all these and it's definitely helped. And I think from the soybean standpoint, as we look towards the future, there is talk of what's deemed right now HT4 soybeans, right? That'll be a traded soybean that's going to be glufosinate, glyphosate, 2,4-D, and dicamba resistant.
And HPPD.
And potentially HPPD, correct. That may be tagged along with it as well, depending on how the trait got moved in. And so how does that have an impact? And I think that's where, in a perfect world, do we have an overtop where you're spraying 2,4-D and dicamba and glufosinate in the same tank mix over the top? No, I don't think that probably works. But having those extra tools in the tool bag of having stuff traded gives you the opportunity of, hey, could we do our pre-burn down of dicamba, and then we can come back with our 2,4-D glufosinate premix, or and so those options are there. Obviously, I'm not going to speculate. I don't know if dicamba is going to eventually get a relabel, and maybe it's just a pre-only. I don't know where that's going to fall. Maybe it will continue to be over the top, but it's concerns like that, and like you said, with soybeans potentially being traded with HPPDs as well, we're going to have to be effective in managing that as well, because there is some confirmation of some resistance of it, but it is still one of our better products we have in corn from a weed management standpoint. And you start being able to throw that out on soybeans. It very quickly soon becomes the next glyphosate, right? Where you can put it on every crop, and we're going to run out.
It could be a good trade. I mean, we, especially in these dry years, we saw some HPPD carryover last year. We're set up to possibly see some this year. Having that trait in a bean, could be a positive, from that standpoint. But
right.
To your point, I mean, you start throwing the same thing at it year after year after year. We thought Group 15s were bulletproof. And I'm sure not trying to sound the alarm or put a panic out there, but you need to be aware that they are not bulletproof, and we're starting to see that now.
Yeah.
So,
well, stepping back to your point, I think it's an extremely valid one about kind of the label registration and the team enlist versus team dicamba stuff. This lawsuit brought by Center for Biological Diversity. Essentially, you can think of them as an ambulance chaser for any sort of Endangered Species Act, listing, any sort of, EPA approval of certain products. Every label approval from now on essentially will be sued and challenged in court. Just like every Endangered Species Act designation, anybody trying to remove an endangered species from, all of those will be sued and contested in court. 100% of the time. It's going to happen. So, essentially, I think that, like you said, on the, kind of one team versus the other team, it's a big deal for agriculture moving forward, because which of these labels are not going to survive that court process post label approval. And there's a lot of things that the EPA has to line up to make sure that everything's covered, right? You mentioned the FIFRA Act and all the comment periods. Well, there's also, essentially proving that product has no effects on any endangered species in any state that it's registered in. That is a tall order, right? Because essentially you have to say that every ounce of this product applied under label, like on label, every ounce of on label application has to take 0 endangered species across the entire territory, right? That's an incredibly hard thing to prove.
It's almost like proving a negative. I mean, it's just,
it's just
where does it stop?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, none of them are targeting those species, obviously. However, when you say, you're never going to take an individual of an endangered species with an application of this, that's pretty darn hard, right? So I just think that it's a I don't want to, again, trying not to be super doom and gloom, but it's a much tougher process moving forward for any of these forms of chemistry, especially the over the top stuff that we're applying later in the summer when you have more insects and other plants that are out there on the landscape. it's a big deal, and I don't know. I don't see a great future for some of these products, unfortunately, unless we can get through some of these hurdles of all the legal challenges, all the paperwork things that somebody didn't dot the right I or cross the right T on the application, 10 months ago in this packet of 500 pages, right? So,
Yeah, because that's something important to. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's something important to point out. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you did. I mean,
Yeah.
this was not. This ruling had nothing to do, my understanding, and this
Yep.
this is dangerous. I thought about being a lawyer once when I was a kid. I obviously I went a different path.
I think you'd have been good. I think you'd have been good.
I obviously went a different path, so don't take what I'm saying on any of this stuff with a grain of salt. But my understanding is it had nothing to do. This was not new research on dicamba. It was not new research even on what you're talking about now, the environmental issues.
Yep.
This was going into the paperwork and finding out, well, they didn't do this. They should have done this
Correct.
according to this opinion of that.
Yep.
And it's not the product. It's the
Correct.
procedure.
Yeah,
So-
yes, absolutely. This was a procedural challenge, if you will.
So
Yep.
did anybody see this coming? And if they did, do they see other products coming up to the butcher block? Does
Yep.
anybody know of any other ones? That,
Absolutely. I guess the best example, Emily, I can think of is, Enlist, what was it, a year or two ago, had some holes essentially in application zones cut out of it for endangered species because they were, again, essentially sued and said, nope, you didn't account for the take of these endangered species. And they're like, yep, you're right, so we can't apply that product there. Then when that label was rewritten and re-pushed out, it contained what? It contained a laundry list of mitigation measures that should be followed in order to apply this product, right? That, I think, is probably the only realistic or a realistic path forward for a lot of these products, is there going to be a lot of parameters like, field buffers, cultural practices around the field of application, buffers, all of that kind of stuff involved in essentially legally applying any of these herbicides. So if you thought your application tracking was difficult before, just writing down what day you sprayed and how much you sprayed and what the weather conditions were, essentially moving forward, I feel like it's going to be more, well, did this field contain sufficient buffers? Was there bare soil exposed? What were the weather conditions? What was blooming in the next field? These are all realistic things that I think that we are going to have to, deal with as an industry.
So who's that going to also fall back on? Is it going to fall back on the landowner? Or is it going to fall back on the person applying it? And then who's coming out? Who has the teeth to then make sure that actually is getting done?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. So those are all great questions. At the end of the day, according to the label, it falls to whoever's applying the chemistry. That's how the label. You're the one. If you're the one making the application, you're the one that has to read the label and follow the label. Right. So
then, are you guys helping landowners implement buffer strips? How
I
are
think,
landowners keeping
yep.
up with that?
Yep. Again, these are all visions of the future, right? Or things that I see coming down the path. But I think a lot of times, if we are custom applying for somebody, there may be a day where we have to essentially validate the field before we make an application, right? We've got to look it up, look at the field, make sure that the correct cultural practices are enacted. This is not something I'm looking forward to, by the way. I'm just trying to be a realist. It's like the right cultural practices are enacted. There's a buffer around the field. Yes, we can make that application. Whereas we may roll up with a sprayer, stuff's not right, and we're going to have to say no. Again, not something I'm looking forward to, not something that I want to think about even, but I'm wondering if that's not our path forward for some of these products. So we probably went too deep into that.
Well, no, I don't. Honestly, I don't think you can go deep enough because I'm not advocating for guys to go the way of Europe and start bringing their tractors out to I-70 and block traffic or anything. But people need to be as involved as possible, making sure your local elected officials are aware of these situations, and I'm not one to push that kind of stuff on a regular basis, but I think it's important that they know because they need to be educated. Folks do not know this stuff. If you do If you do a Google search right now on any of this stuff and center it around 2,4-D, I did that the other day for some reason, and all that pops up are articles about Agent Orange. Was 2,4-D a component of Agent Orange? You bet. They leave out the fact that it was the 2,4,5-T that had the dioxin in it, the other component of it. They leave out the fact that 2,4-D is probably sprayed on most of our yards, either by somebody or by the homeowner. They leave out the fact that it's in Trimec, same with dicamba.
Yep.
That stuff is not part of the conversation. It's the scary stuff, it's the headline stuff. And the details matter. I joked around with y'all this morning, that despite the fog, I made pretty good time and passed 10 Corvettes on my way into town. Totally true statement. But it takes on a different light when I tell you that they were on a trailer and I passed them basically, I'll say, doing 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
These details, folks don't know about it. Folks that aren't in our business, and that includes, our representatives from agricultural areas. They don't necessarily understand these things because it's really, no pun intended, getting down in the weeds of our business. So we've got to let folks know about it. This is why, I know our board makes a trip to Washington once or twice a year. I think those are important trips. Mm-hmm. This is letting the folks, that are on your, the industry groups, corn, soy, those kind of things. Yep. They need to know what we're up against. We lost chlorpyrifos, Lorsban to most folks, a couple, 3 years ago for all intent and purposes. And, if you're raising alfalfa and all of a sudden you're dealing with resistant weevil, you're dealing with resistant aphids, there are other solutions out there. They add up $40-50 real fast. Right. The problem on the herbicide side is we really don't necessarily have other solutions at any cost. There's some noise. Hopefully, maybe we're going to get some, chlorpyrifos back on some different crops, including alfalfa. Some of that remains to be seen. But it's a fight that's not going to be won. It's a fight that's going to have to be continued, and sure. It's always going to be a push-pull, and
I feel like it's just a fight.
We all
that's
have to be
gonna
involved.
It's a fight that's going to have to be mitigated for going forward. I think this kind of leads us down the path of other things too, or at least that's what's in my head, right? Everything you talked about is based around Waterhemp, and essentially every piece of weed control I think about across weed management in North Missouri, it's all Waterhemp based. So step one is pre-emergence, right? Those are incredibly important. But also a key part of step one is how do I make the Waterhemp never germinate? And so I think when you look at cultural practices that you're doing from January to January, right? I'm not just talking about what you're doing in crop, but I'm talking about how you're managing that field as a whole. How do you manage that field to make Waterhemp not germinate?
And you personally had some pretty good success with that with your cover crops.
Yeah,
That's a whole other.
You're not going to take me down this path, Scott. But yes, so
but
yes, there are cultural practices that they're not right. It's not a chemical application for where you can keep every single Waterhemp from germinating. That's not how it works. However, if you have 25%, so let's say you work the field and you have 10,000 Waterhemp plants germinate. If you don't work the field, you may have 400 Waterhemp plants germinate. And it's easier to kill 400 than it is 10,000. Or just think of your the pea plants and the Gregor Mendel and the Punnett Square stuff, right? What is the genetical odds that you have a resistant plant in 10,000 versus the genetics odds that you have a resistant plant in 400? And so, again, I feel like 400 plants are easier to kill than 10,000. It's just a random example I thought of.
But then with Waterhemp, I understand your point, but
yeah,
thousands and 10,000s and all that, we need to be talking millions.
Oh yeah, no, exactly.
It's Waterhemp. But to your point, I tried to cue you up for tee up a softball for
that was
mixing my metaphors. give you a hanging curve there for the cover crops, and you didn't bite. But to that, the fact that we're even talking about cover crops. Aside from weed control, that's an environmental practice. I'll tell you another environmental practice, no-till.
Yep.
Take away chemistry, and I forget the exact figure, but a few years ago, weed scientist down in Arkansas did a thing out at the Bradford farm, here in Columbia.
Yep.
And one of his key points, I believe it was Tennessee, he was talking about prior to Palmer. So this is before Enlist, it's before Extend, kind of that in-between period where a lot of this stuff was having to be cut out. And I forget the exact figures, but a large majority, I wanted to say like 80 some odd percent of Tennessee was in no-till. And with Palmer showing, that number was drastically reduced. So, we're actually using these things to promote one of the biggest environmental activities that we can do is in production ag, and that's no-till. So, maybe, I don't know if they care, but one of the unintended consequences of taking these tools away from us is, we've got to break the steel back out.
Yep.
And I don't think anybody that's not doing that wants to do that.
Yep. No, there's no doubt. There's been studies done that I've seen that kind of try to quantify how many tons of soil just the introduction of like glyphosate tolerant crops saved, and it's ridiculous, right? Because you're exactly right. All those chemistries and all those modes of action, our ability to clean things up, our ability to lay down residuals on undisturbed soil, allows all those environmental practices to happen. So it's stuff that we have to keep around. So absolutely. But I guess like I said, just my overall point was moving forward, I think we're going to have to, again, think of the systems approach and look at not just prepping a seed bed, but understanding the other things that we're doing culturally out there in the field. Essentially, you're prepping a weed seed bed. And so do you have the proper chemistry to be able to control those weeds that germinate from that weed seed bed that you just prepped?
But that's also taking it into your own hands as opposed to someone regulating you to do the things that you don't want to do. So if you're actually able to do those things, the things you're wanting to do, you're not getting regulated on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think circling back to, we discussed, we have MFA, we have historically about 60% of the dicamba needs for us. Like you just mentioned, Adam, is do we have the products we need to be able to control the weeds that came up?
Yep.
Jordan, from your perspective, how has this whole thing had an impact on the glufosinate market? We're not that far removed from COVID when we had a huge shortage of glufosinate and glyphosate. Have we recovered from the glufosinate shortage from that perspective, and then how has pricing changed as well with this ruling?
That's a good question, and maybe this is a bright spot to talk about. We've talked about some stuff that seems negative, but glufosinate market does look different than it did. So throughout those couple years of supply issues, price shot up. I think glufosinate per gallon, some of that branded stuff was $60, $70 a gallon. That price has drastically dropped, and the inventories have gone up. So it's more readily available. We have more available. I think the overall market has more glufosinate available. There's been some talk about what that market looks like. So historically, the last couple of years, I think it's been estimated that's a 14 million gallon market, total glufosinate, so Liberty and the generics. And it's estimated now that that's going to be around 16 million when you take in the increased demand on these dicamba acres. If you look at import records and existing stocks, we have in excess of 20 million in the market. So I'm not saying that there won't be some spots where maybe it feels tight, but we have enough glufosinate in the market. BSF has good stock of their branded product, and then those post-patent manufacturers have product too. And on the price, it has gone down. It's historic lows as far as tech cost in China, and so we're looking at closer to 2018, 2019 prices on glufosinate. So a lot easier to swallow that per acre cost than it was in the past.
Yep. No, that's a good point, because that's a product and a solution that we're obviously going to continue to continue to rely on, especially with things getting taken away. Any other thoughts? Kind of moving forward. Like I said, I know that I guess we don't know whether or not EPA Bayer will pursue another label for Extend. So I guess kind of that platform and that herbicide tolerance essentially in crops is sort of in question. I guess I don't think that's stepping outside the box too far on a path forward. So, Cameron, I guess, as director of seed division, any thoughts, I guess, on production, or I guess have you have any insight there on seed production for 2025?
So seed production from 2025. I mean, from a more soy standpoint, MFA's branded seed. We're production wise, we're still moving forward with the same production of our XtendFlex beans that we have in the previous years. From that perspective, most of our XtendFlex lines that we sell is in the boot. My gut what I've talked to of people, I don't know. There's a lot of optimism from those people, especially in the Delta, the boot, that there will be something for 2025 of dicamba usage. It's just because it's such a cotton country. Those guys, 2,4-D cotton is not big. It's not, and dicamba is a huge necessity for that, and quite honestly, for our economy, the U.S. economy of that. And so there's a lot of optimism of that. As there's still going to be some usage of dicamba. Again, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but even if it's not approved, there may be some cowboying of, hey, this is what we're still going to use because this is what our best usage is. And so from our standpoint, the XtendFlex beans, the production is still there. We do have some pockets in northern Missouri where some XtendFlex. My gut tells me unless there's something happens that those pockets may switch to Enlist. So we have increased some Enlist production. I know talking with some of our partner brands and other seed companies, if you're not in the Delta area, majority of your Delta area, they are making a shift of production plans, and so there is a higher majority of enlist production for those acres. So it has had some impact on that for sure.
Gotcha.
If I can, reminded me of one thing that I've heard from some of the suppliers of dicamba is, we talked about 60% of our needs being covered, but what we have seen as a trend in the industry, especially in the Midwest, is acres rapidly moving to the Enlist acre. And so what happened in that situation is you may have had retailers that had dicamba on the floor, and then those acres have swapped over time. And so there may be some excess stocks that we may see in the Midwest to flow back in. And hopefully that's the case to where these over-the-top needs, whether it's in the Boothill or wherever that is in the Delta, where there's some excess stock that I know BSF and Bayer both have mentioned that they're trying to find those pockets that may have that product that we can maybe move where it's needed.
Yep, absolutely. Well, folks, what did we forget to kind of talk about or cover on this issue?
I mean, I'd be remiss not to bring up the things that we always talk about when we're talking about weed control. They're going to be possibly more important this year than ever. The first one, everybody hears us say it all the time, but overlapping residuals. And not to be cute with this or anything, but overlapping means they overlap and you don't see the weeds. Overlapping is not putting on a pre, seeing weeds come up, putting something in there to kill those weeds, and then putting another pre. Those didn't overlap. That's a pre and a post residual. We really need to overlap these and never let them get out of the ground. Obviously, weather happens and misses happen, and everything happens, but we want to, as much as possible, try to just not let them get out of the ground. So instead of maybe 5 and 6 weeks, we need to really be looking at that 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the product. We may need to look at some products that we've historically maybe shied away from. The PPOs, the Valor's Authorities, those come to mind. And maybe they're not a place for everywhere on your farm or with every variety, but maybe they are for some. And maybe some of this needs to be a little more field by field than just trying to have a program for everything. And I get that too. I mean, we try to, you guys try to keep it simple, and we try to keep it simple. I mean, there's a lot going on during that period, and no reason to complicate it, but we may need to have some different approaches. The other thing that I would just remind folks of with Liberty and with there being a lot of pressure on Liberty, and it's just the basics that have been most of these with Liberty for a long time, but coverage is everything, so 20 gallons minimum. I get why folks shy away from that, including us. But it's a big deal. Getting good coverage, getting coverage on, every one of those growing points. 3 pounds of AMS, and that means 3 pounds of AMS. There's a lot of water conditioners out there that have some AMS. We need 3 pounds of AMS. Very important with Liberty. Weed height, obviously, I think BASF always, I like these little things that help you remember, when you're spraying Liberty, just, kind of pretend you work at a bank and keep banker's hours. You don't want to be super early and you don't want to be super late. But also scouting, I guess I'd head up the crop track program in our area. I got to bring up scouting, but whether we're doing it for you or you're doing it yourself, do not spray your weeds and just assume you got them, because they can fool you. I attended a thing at Bradford a couple years ago. Dr. Bradley did a really interesting, looking at the time of day. I think they sprayed at 7 in the morning, 9, 11, so on and so forth throughout the day. And then when it came the day for the tour, can't remember if this was last summer or the summer before. When it came the day for the tour, we looked at the plot and he said, "Yeah, I really don't have any data for you. They all died, or it looked like it controlled them all." I followed up a couple weeks later. There was something, I can't even remember what it was. There was something that I wanted to know how he had what he had done. And I think it might have just been we were struggling with Liberty, and I was curious exactly what they did because they had good control all the way around. And he said, "Yeah, never mind, they all came back." So even it can happen to any of us. So just make sure that you're looking at those. Do not spray them. Assume you killed them. This goes for this, a little different topic, but I mean your HPPDs. If you're posting those, and I think the days of making sure you got a stand of corn and letting the weeds come up with the corn and then going out and killing it all with your Acuron or whatever and relying on that HPPD to take the Waterhemp, as much as possible, we need to avoid that. But if you are still posting some of those with either one of those pre-mixes or with a straight, Callisto Explorer, make sure you go back and scout them. Do not assume you killed them. We used to be able to just spray those and walk away from them, and we can't anymore. We need to make sure it's still working. So.
Yep. No, those are all good tips. Things I've seen on the land. The AMS deal. there's a lot of folks that don't like messing with dry AMS. I can share those woes, I guess.
I get it.
But just if you're going to use a liquid product, make sure you're getting that 3 pounds that you were talking about. I've seen some recommendations out there for, put a quart of this in or 2 quarts of this or whatever. And I mean, you're not getting 25% of the AMS that you need to light that load up. So good stuff, Scott. I appreciate all those reminders. Anybody else got anything that you need to add to this discussion? Okay, great. Well, I appreciate all your all's time for being here today, and I appreciate everybody's time for listening. And hopefully you learned something from the minds in the room. So anyway, we'll if not, we'll do better next time, right? So thanks again, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next episode.
Yep, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.